I lived as a slave on the Corinthian plantation my whole life up until the time that Tall John, my apologies, ran out of the backwoods and into my life. I have no idea exactly how long the time before Tall John might have been, but I was most likely about 14 years old at that time. Slaves didn't have birthday parties like the white children of master or the white folk that either worked for the master or lived on the larder of his home. That's wild to think of. So I put a note here for us to unpack a little bit more. He was uncertain of his age. Here's why. Slaves did not know the date that they were born. Why do you think that was? Why do you think that the slave owners didn't want slaves to have an idea of their birth date? There was no birthday cake, there was no birthday parties, there was none of those types of things. What do you think that was, young folks? Why? But the white slaves knew their birthdays, and not only did they know their birthdays were celebrated. It's another way that our ancestors were dehumanized. When I say dehumanized, it means they were not looked as if to be human. They were only viewed as property. Slaves didn't have birthday parties, and so they didn't have ages like the white people did. Big Mama Flore always said that white peoples got as many ages as you can count, but slaves only got four ages. That's baby child, boy or girl, old boy or old girl, and dead. Only four ages our ancestors were given and viewed as. I love Big Mama Flore. She was round and soft, always gave me a big hug in the morning. She was one of the only ones whoever showed me kindness when I was little. Big Mama Flore is a key character in our book. My mother died when I was too young to remember her face. Big Mama told me that my mother, her name was Psalma, had a boyfriend over at the Williams plantation, but she would never tell anybody who he was because she didn't want him getting into trouble for sneaking out to see her in the big house at night. Flore also told me that the man nobody knew was my father. Now, here's a thing, just for a pause, just for a second. Plantation. 47 and other slaves, our other ancestors, lived on the Corinthians plantation, and now we are introduced to the Williams plantation. A plantation was where the white slave owners had a huge house that was up on a hill typically or far off, and then they had a bunch of land. And when you think of plantation, the root word of plantation is plant, right? So on this huge land, these white slave owners forced our ancestors to grow particular crops, that they would take these crops and then sell and make money. One of the big crops was cotton. Not only was it cotton, it was also tobacco and many other things. So when you think of plantation, think of a place where our people were forced to do things that we didn't want to do. And when we didn't do it, we were brutalized, we were harmed, and put in difficult spaces. Okay? Back to the reading. She didn't tell me, she didn't even tell you his name, Big Mama. This is 47 asking Big Mama who his dad was. I asked when she would tell me the sad story of Sama Turner when I was still too little to have to work in the cotton fields. No, baby child, Big Mama said. Master Tobias would have given a Christmas ham to the nigger told who had fathered his wife's favorite maid's baby. He walked through the slave quarters at night saying that he would give the man who looked like Salma's baby to Mr. Stewart for punishment. So if some slave knew who it was that your mama was seeing, he would have done himself a big favor by telling Master Tobias his name. And once on the Kent, Tobias I knowed who that slave was, he was sure to end up in Mr. Stewart's shack. We introduced to two names here, two new people within the book. Master Tobias, and Mr. Stewart. Now let's talk about Master Tobias. Master Tobias was the owner of the plantation. His name is Tobias Turner. There's a connection there. You notice that when we read and we talked about Psalma 47's mom, her last name was Turner. Slaves, our ancestors, were forced to take not only the last name of the slave owner, but they also gave us our name. To the point on, and we'll see later on in the book, where initially you weren't given a name, you were only given a number. The other character that we see here take place in this particular portion of the book is Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stewart is a bad man, an evil man, a harsh, mean man. He was what is called the overseer. So you had the master of the plantation and his family typically, right? And then you had what they call the overseer. The overseer was responsible for making sure that our ancestors did whatever work that the master had us to do. So he, the overseer, would hire other people and they would ride around the plantation making sure that our ancestors were doing the job. And you're going to see later on in the book how these folks use brutal, horrible methods to get us to do the things that we weren't to do. It wasn't just simply like your mom and dad or anybody else in your house telling you to go do clean your room or pick up your toys or put the game away. It wasn't simply that. It was the overseer showing up or one of his men showing up with whips and other methods to force. So if you didn't do it, he would hurt you. And if you continue to be disobedient, they would take you to this place called Mr. Stewart's shack. And we'll see what this Mr. Stewart's shack is all about a little bit here later on. Tobias Turner was Master's name, and Mr. Stewart was his overseer. The overseer made sure that all us slaves worked hard and didn't cause any ruckus or break the rules. The rules were that you did as you told. Didn't talk back, never complained, and stayed in your place. So on the plantation, we had what they called rules, right? The rules were you did as you told, didn't talk back, never complained, and stayed in your place. Mr. Stewart had a shack that stood out in the middle of the stand of live oaks behind the slave quarters. And if you were ever unlucky enough to get sent back there, then you were in serious trouble. Many a slave never returned from Mr. Stewart's killing shack. And those that did come back were never the same. The killing shack, Mr. Stewart's shack. What do you think happens in that shack? What do you think some of the things that took place? Just by the name of Killing Shack. I haven't seen Mr. Stewart's torture chamber at that time, but I knew about it because I had heard stories from those few souls that survived his torments. They said that he had a pine table that was twice as long as a tall man is tall, and that there were leather straps on both ends that were tied to the slave's wrists and ankles. The straps were attached to baskets filled with heavy stones that would stretch a poor soul's legs and arms out so far from their sockets that afterward the slave could hardly even lift his feet off the ground to walk. That's torture. Would have to use both of his hands just to get the food to his mouth to eat. So they would stretch, put him on a long table, and strap their arms, their wrists, and their feet, and then put heavy stones in bags and stretch them out to the point where their bones in their arms would pull out of socket. Very, very painful. Back to the reading. Yes, sir, Big Mama Flore would say in the backyard under the big magnolia tree that Una Turner's great grandfather planted when he settled the land back before any living slave, even Mud Albert, could remember. Yes, indeedy. If Master Tobias known who your father was, that man wouldn't have stood a nigger's chance on the main road at midday. Black folk, our ancestors, were not allowed to be off of the plantation anytime without permission from the master. So for one of our ancestors to be on the main road and at midday when the sun is beaming down, it's always turned into a bad experience for our ancestors. Back to the reading. I was brokenhearted when Big Mama would tell the story about my mother and her sad end. When Psalma died giving birth to me, Una Turner told Master Tobias that I was to remain on her family's plantation for as long as I lived as a remembrance to my mother. Now, Una Turner was Master Tobias's mom. Okay? Psalma was Una Turner's maid. So, in this portion of the book, Una Turner is telling Master Tobias that nothing should happen to 47. He should stay on the plantation forever, not to be sold, not to be given away, but he always was to stay on the family plantation as a slave of the Turner family. Okay? Una loved my mother because of her voice. It was said that Psalma Turner had the most beautiful voice that anyone on the Corinthian plantation had ever heard. Let's see what the note is. Slaves with special gifts were looked after and favored by slave owners. Okay, so Psalma was able to sing very well, had a beautiful voice, according to the book, which allowed her to have a special place on the plantation. Now, that doesn't mean that she didn't suffer any of the hardship that our other ancestors had. It just meant that the slave owners looked at her favorably. So Una Turner loved, in her own twisted, evil way, Psalma Turner. Okay? Now, it's important because sometimes we want to get the understanding that while the slave owners had they liked some of their slaves, they didn't like them enough to free them. They didn't like them enough not to mistreat them. Okay? Because Una Turner's constitution and bad nerves, and she would have an attack, it was only my mother's singing that would keep her from despair. Slaves were special gifts, were looked after and favored by slave owners. Miss Una loved my mother so much, Big Mama Flore said, that she would have been sure to keep her up in the big house with her if she had lived. But 3 years after my mother died, Miss Una had one of her attacks, and without Psalma singing, she succumbed to the melody and passed over to the upper level and back to the place that all life comes from. Sometime after Miss Una died, Master Tobias named me 47 and told Big Mama that when I was big enough, I was meant to live out in the slave quarters and work in the cotton fields with all the other slaves. Master Tobias didn't like me because he blamed my mother for getting pregnant and stealing herself from his property by dying. But he didn't want to sell me off because it was Miss Una's dying wish to keep me on her plantation near my mother's grave. Master Tobias didn't like 47, right? Didn't like him. And here's why. He didn't like him because when he was born, his mother died during the pregnancy, during childbirth. And because she died, he wasn't able to have his property, Psalma. It wasn't that he liked her. It wasn't the fact that he cared for her. It was literally because part of his property died. Okay, back to the reading. Until I grew, Master Tobias made me live in the barn, feeding and grooming the horses and running my errands that the house slaves had for me. I made myself pretty scarce out there because whenever master saw me, he'd remember my mother and then he'd get mad and look to see if I've done something wrong. And if there was one straw out of place, he would tell Big Mama Flore to get her razor strap and whip my backside. Big Mama didn't want to beat me, but she did anyway because Tobias was watching. After these beatings, when Master was gone, Big Mama would fold me in her arms and apologize. I'm sorry, baby child, but if I didn't make you cry, he would have took the strap, she say, and whip you hard enough to draw blood. So Master Tobias would force Big Mama Flore to whip, to beat 47. And Big Mama would beat 47 because in her mind, she would rather do it herself than have Master Tobias do it or one of the overseers do it. Note, parents would beat their children in order to keep the slave owners from beating them more harshly or more severely. And we read, why he hate me so much, Big Mama, I'd whine. He blame you for his wife dying, she say. He just hurt so much inside, and you the only one left alive that he could blame. But I didn't do nothing. Shush, baby. You just stay out of Tobias' way. Don't look up when he's around and always do all your work, and more than that, so you don't give him no reason to have me beat you. We both knew that when I got big enough to work in the fields, he'd give me over to Mr. Stewart when he got mad. And Mr. Stewart would use a bullwhip on my bare back. He might even stretch my bones until I was dead. We both knew I was safe from Mr. Stewart until I grew big enough to pick cotton. So Mama Flore didn't feed me milk or meat so that I stay small and not have to go to work in the cotton fields. Mama Flore knew that his destination, his ultimate place, was going to be in the fields. So she wouldn't give him the things, the foods, and drink to help him grow because she didn't want him to get out there too fast. I wasn't allowed in the big house. The only times I was ever there was when Big Mama sneaked me in so I can see how grand the white people's lives were. So I lived in the barn my whole life until just before Tall John came to the plantation. In that time, Big Mama Flore made my acquaintance with Mud Albert and Champ Nolan. Mud Albert was the oldest slave on the plantation, and Champ was the strongest. Champ once carried a full-grown mule across the yard in front of the mansion. Albert and Champ loved Big Mama, and so they told her that they would take me under their wings when I had to go out in the slave quarters and live with the rough element out there. Later on in the book, we're going to see how rough the slave quarters were. I spent most of my time working hard and avoiding master's attention, but it wasn't all hard work and beatings. The barn was very large and it had a little window at the top for ventilation. When nobody was looking, I used to climb up to that window and pretend that I was in the crow's nest of some great ship coming from Europe or Africa. I had heard about these ships from some of the slaves that had been brought in chains from across the seas and from some of the house slaves who had seen pictures of the great three-mast sailboats and books from Master's library. I sit up there at the end of the day, watching while the slaves picked cotton in the fields, pretending that I was the lookout put up there to tell the captain when there was some island paradise where we could drop our anchor. And sometimes, if I was very lucky, I would catch a glimpse of Miss Eloise, Tobias's daughter. Eloise was dainty and white as a china plate. Her pale, rare head and green eyes were startling. In my mind, she was the most beautiful creature in all of Georgia. It's a fascinating thought to hear, right? That he thinks that this pale, red-headed, green-eyed white girl was the most beautiful thing that he ever saw in Georgia. Why do you think that is? What do you think when you hear that? Take a moment and just sit with that thought. Yeah. All right. When Eloise would come out to play, I squeezed down behind the sill of the open window and watched. Even when she was alone, she laughed while she played, swinging in her swing chair or eating sweets on the veranda. Every time I saw her in the yard behind the master's mansion, I got a funny feeling all over. I wanted to go down there and be happy with her, but I knew that a nigger like me wasn't allowed even to look at someone like Miss Eloise. One day, when Eloise was sitting in her swing chair alone, I stuck my head out to see what she was doing. But I didn't realize that the sun was at my back and that it cast a shadow of my head down into Miss Eloise's lap. She looked up, squinting at the sun, and said, "Who's up there?" I ducked down under the windowsill, but that didn't stop her from calling. "Who's up there spying on me?" she cried. "Come out right now or I'll call my daddy." I knew that if Miss Eloise called her father, I'd get more than a whipping from Big Mama's razor strap. He might whip me himself until I was knocked out and bleeding like the slaves I've seen him bullwhip while they were tied to the big wagon wheel in the main yard. I stood up and looked out. "Yes, ma'am, Miss Eloise," I said. "I've been working up here. Is it me you want?" Hmm. She was a child, and 47 was a child, yet he still called her Miss Eloise. And I read, "You were spying on me," she said. "No, ma'am," I assured her. "I just working." "Doing what?" If you if ever you tell a lie, you should know where it's going." That's what Mud Albert would tell me. I should have heeded those words before telling Eloise that I was at work, because there was no work for a groom like me up in the high part of the barn. "Brushing the horses," I said lamely. "There ain't no horses in the top of the barn," she said, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You're malingering up there, ain't you, boy?" "I sorry," I said, near tear from the fear in my heart. "Come down here," Eloise said in a very serious tone. I climbed down the ladder from the roof and ran through the barn into the yard where the young white girl stood. She wore a yellow bonnet held under her chin by a red ribbon and a yellow dress with flouncy slip underneath the skirt. She was 11 years old and pretty as a child can be. I came up to her with my head hanging down and my eyes on the ground. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Were you spying on me, boy?" "I was just looking, Miss Eloise. I didn't know you was down here." "Why you looking at your feet?" she asked. "You know it's rude not to look at someone when you're talking to 'em." "I ain't supposed to look at you, ma'am. You's a white lady, and niggers ain't supposed to look at white ladies." It was true. Even Fred Chocolate, Master Tobias Butler, was not supposed to look at the white woman straight on. "You were looking at me from in the barn," she said. "No, ma'am," I lied. I looked out, but I didn't know that you was there." "That's not true," she said. "I swear it is," I said, still looking at my feet. "Look at me this instant, you insolent boy," she said then. I raised my head slowly. I had to look up because Eloise was elevated above me on the porch. When I saw her face was a big smile. "Don't be scared," she said. "I won't tell." My heart skipped at her kind words. I felt as she were saving me, even though it was her threats that I was afraid of. "Do you want a molasses cookie?" she said. "Yes, ma'am," I replied. From a tin can on the swinging chair, she brought out a big brown cookie. She knelt down in her pretty dress and handed it to me. "Now run along," she said, "and don't worry. I won't tell that you were looking." I ran back into the barn and up to my crow's nest. Mama Flore had let me taste the crumbs from cookies before, but I never had a whole one or even a proper piece. I sat up next to the window and ate my cookie, thinking of young Eloise. I was hoping that somehow she would remember me and make me her page. That way I could always be near her and eat sugary cookies every night of the week. That was all before I met Tall John and learned that no man or slave could serve another because that made them a slave.